Okay, let's get into our study today. We are currently studying and harmonizing the gospel accounts of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John using outline information from the Fourfold Gospel by J.W. McGarvey and Philip Pendleton. And if you have your outline this morning, we're on page 3, letter F under Roman numeral 5, and we are ready down there at the number 4 under letter F. If you're able to follow my the way I put that together, then that's where you'll find where we are this morning. We already read last week Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 through 48. That's where we left off last time, was starting that study. So we'll go back to it today. I will not have all of it reread today because we're going to be going over the verses as we're assembled together anyway. But just as a reminder, we stopped last week at Matthew 5:17. This is still in the Sermon on the Mount. Keep that in mind as you're studying this. This is all in regard to what you're going to study in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. All of the material there that Jesus is speaking was part of that Sermon on the Mount that is so familiar and so well known. And on verse 17, he said, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." And we touched on that last Sunday. There's a difference in destroying something and fulfilling something. To fulfill it means you met all the obligations of it. There's no more need really for it. It's been fulfilled. It has been accomplished, or the thing which it was for has been accomplished. Jesus was able to fulfill the law of Moses. Now, he was the only one who ever would be able to do that. None of us would have been able to do that because, unfortunately for us, we know that we have all sinned, and that we would not have been able to live the life that Jesus did perfectly in that sense, and that we would not have been able to do it. So we ought to be very grateful that Jesus came and lived that life here on earth, that he was able to fulfill that old law. We touched on it last week. It has been taken out of the way, nailed to the cross, Colossians 2:14. It is no longer the standard by which we are to live today. Not even the 10 Commandments. We don't follow any of the old law. All of the old law has been nailed to the cross and taken out of the way. Now, some people sometimes say, well, what about murder? Is murder still wrong? I thought thou shalt not kill. We shouldn't murder. Well, we shouldn't, but not because it's in the old law, but because that's a principle in the new law, the law of Christ. There are very similar things in the new law to some of the things in the old law, but we never need to mistake it. None of the old law came over into the law of Christ. The law of Moses and the prophets was fulfilled. It was taken out of the way. Even though there may be similarities in the new law, that's a new law, and we need to understand that. It was by Christ's authority, and it is the new covenant under which we live today. All right, now verse 18, he said, "For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled." Now, you have to keep in mind, as he's preaching this sermon, it has not been fulfilled at that moment as he's speaking. He will do that on the cross. He will fulfill it in his death on the cross and take it out of the way. But until that point, it was still future tense. So as he's saying in verse 18, "Till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law," what he's getting at there is still going to be ineffective until all be fulfilled. It didn't matter how close he was to death. Until every bit of the law had been fulfilled, it was still in effect. But since it has been fulfilled, none of it is in effect. It is completely no longer the law by which we live today. So keep in mind, as he's mentioning in verse 19, the commandment you're about to read, he's talking to a degree, still living under the old law system. He said, "Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven." Let me ask you a question very quickly this morning. If you've offended or you've sinned according to one aspect of the law, what were you guilty of? The whole law. That's exactly right. It did not make a difference which aspect of the law it was that you broke. If you broke one part of the law, you were guilty of the law, period. End of discussion. But here, it didn't make a difference whether it was a, quote, larger commandment, as some men might look at it. Now, again, I use "thou shalt not murder" as an example of some might say, well, that's a major command from the Old Testament. It didn't make a difference, really, whether it's, quote, large in our eyes or not. If anyone broke one of the least of those commandments, it still was wrong in the sight of God. That should help us to understand today when we live under the new law. It does not matter whether we think it's a major issue or a minor issue. If God says it's an issue, we leave it alone and we do what he said. We don't try to change it around. We don't mix it up. If he says something is sin, regardless of how minuscule our minds might think that it is, we need to accept that it is sin and not practice such. And therefore, we are not the final determination of that. God is. And we don't have all the subjectivism that people have out there in regard to, well, I don't think this matters or I don't think this matters. If God says it does, it does. So whoever was to break one of the least commandments, and he says, "and shall teach men so." Now that right there is something that's very special to me, I guess, as a gospel preacher and teacher, because the teacher is also responsible for what he does. And remember that we are going to be able to be held accountable for every idle word that comes out of our mouths. And we're going to be, when we teach error, we're going to be held accountable for it. So Jesus is making the point here, if you have a false teacher out there as well, teaching other people to do it, and or if you're one who's breaking one of, quote, these least commandments, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be on the wrong side of God. I don't ever want to be on the wrong side. I understand when we sin, we separate ourselves from God in that sense, but I don't ever really want to stay on the wrong side of God. I want to be on the good side of God. But whosoever shall do and teach them. Now notice the difference. You have one that's not, or is breaking it and teaching men to break it. And you have another who is doing it and teaching men to do it. The same shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. So the principle for us today, not living under the old law, we live under the new. We teach the Word of God as it's written. We don't try to change it around and manipulate it and try to make doctrines of our own. And we obey it ourselves. So we teach it and obey it. There's the old adage, I guess you can look at it from the point of view to, are you willing to live what you preach and live what you teach? And that is something that every gospel preacher and every Bible class teacher has to examine every once in a while. Yes, sir?
Corey, do people really take that seriously? I mean, there's a lot of doctrines out there that they just, this is my opinion of it, and this is the way it is. And you hear it from others that are denominationalism. Where they're not thinking, or they're not taking something serious, or it's embedded in their heart that whatever I spew out of my mouth, it's the truth. And there's a lot of souls that are in danger.
Absolutely there are. The majority of the so-called religious world that believes in, and I'll use this term as loosely as I can, Christianity, the way they define it, a lot of them are lost. The majority are. There's no simple answer I can give you to that in regard to every single person. But as a large and as a whole, or as a majority, a lot of it came from the perspective of what you just said. They're hearing somebody say it. They're hearing somebody teach it. They're hearing somebody get before them that looks authoritative to them, or looks like he's educated or has learned it. And when he says it, that's what they're taking as gospel truth. We should go back and make sure what he's saying is in accordance with this word. I've said it before. I don't mean this arrogantly. I hope you understand from the area from which I'm coming when I say it. If I wanted to, if my desire was to do it, I could teach error and back it up with Scripture. Does that make sense? Now, you can misuse the Word of God. You can teach it out of its context. You can apply it in ways that it was not meant to be applied. And you can say, well, I preached it from the Bible, but you didn't apply it correctly. You didn't handle it right. You didn't rightly divide it. That happens too. There are a lot of folks that misuse Scriptures. So therefore, they'll say, well, my preacher teaches from the Bible. He may use the Bible, but is he handling it right? And therein is the problem. But there's a lot of it out there, a lot of doctrine. No, I don't know that a lot of folks take it as seriously as they should, no. Unfortunately, a lot of folks are very lax when it comes to how they handle the Word of God. They think that God's mercy and grace is going to supersede a lot of the fact that they're unwilling to study and obey it. So that's the idea that I kind of get in my head with that. But it's like a plague out there. It really is. It truly, truly is. I hope that you're not going to offend me in this, and I want you to understand that you're not going to offend me in this. When we're studying together in a Bible class or I'm preaching a sermon, I encourage you, open the book. Make sure that I am using it right, that I am teaching you right. And if I'm teaching you something that is not right, friends, don't follow it. And I mean that sincerely. Your soul is too valuable to follow just a man because he is who he is. Corey Barnette does not intend to teach you error, but Corey Barnette is still just a man. And Corey Barnette can fail and falter in some ways. The Word of God is not going to fail and falter. And I hope you'll be encouraged to do that. You're not by any means whatsoever offending me by doing that. I encourage it. All right, for I say unto you, verse 20. Did I cover that fairly well for you, Don? Okay. For I say unto you that except your righteousness shall exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. There's a lot right there in that one little verse. Let us remind ourselves quickly, what is righteousness? Someone please read for us Psalm 119, verse 172. It is so easy for if we want to define terms to let God do it for us. God has defined in His Word what righteousness is. Psalm 119, verse 172. Someone, if you will.
$172?
Yes, sir.
I have it. My tongue shall speak of your word, for all your commandments are righteousness.
There it is. God defines it for us. All of His commandments are righteousness. So when I obey His commandments, I am then, quote, righteous. That does not mean self-righteous, but it does mean righteous. And how do I become righteous? I obey what His commandments say. If I disobey what His commandments say, then therefore what am I? Unrighteous. That's right. God has defined it for us. We don't have to worry about what we think it is. Or now you hear this sometimes, and I don't have a major issue with it. I know where most are coming from with it. They'll say, well, righteousness is right living. Well, you're right in a way, because right living is doing what the commandments of the Lord say. But we need to understand that that's what we mean by right living, that we're doing what the commandments of the Lord say. So here he's making the point that except your righteousness, unless you obey God's commands better or exceed the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now, if you're one of the first century Jews, that would have gotten your attention. Because who did they think were the so-called righteous ones amongst them at that time period? The scribes and the Pharisees. They were considered the righteous ones. They were the ones who people looked at and doted on and thought, oh, wow, how great they are. And at the end of the day, Jesus made it very plain here. If you're not going to do any better than they are, you're not getting into the kingdom. Now, that's pretty strong. That's one of the things I want to make sure I make a point of, too, before we leave it. Jesus was not afraid to call names and to make the point strongly if necessary. Friends, there's a place and a time for some of that, and then there's a place and a time where it's not as useful. If all we're doing is trying to run somebody down just for the sake of doing it, then we ought to keep our mouths closed. But if we're exposing someone's error that they have publicly spoken or that they have publicly endorsed, we're not wrong to call them out for that. They've already established where they are. We're just answering their doctrine. This is what Jesus did. The scribes and Pharisees, they already have their known doctrines and traditions out there that people have seen and heard? Yes. So Jesus was right to call them on it. And if these individuals in the first century didn't get better to obeying God's word than what the scribes and Pharisees were doing, they weren't getting into the kingdom of heaven. Simple as can be. And why was the issue with the scribes and Pharisees so bad? What was so terrible about what they were doing? Okay, twisting it. They were also doing what else? Adding, that's right. What were they adding primarily a lot of? Okay, idol worship. That's not what I was thinking of, but I mean, there may have been some who were engaged in that, but that's not what I'm thinking of off the top of my head. I'm thinking more of traditions. Not that all traditions are bad, but a tradition should never be more important than the law of God. An opinion is just that. It's an opinion. And everybody, as the old saying goes, has one. I'll give you a for instance on this. You see this up here? What is this? What does it represent? The Lord's Supper, okay? Unleavened bread, fruit of the vine, right? For years, there were some places that would take the fruit of the vine and the unleavened bread, and they would take them in the trays, and they would put them out, and then what they would do is they'd cover them with a sheet. Any of you grow up seeing that anywhere? You did? Very common. And then we started getting these nice trays that were made that had lids on them, and that you could put them on top like we have here to cover things up. Guess what happened when that started to be the case? There were some people in the church that, where's the sheet covering it? It's always been covered with a sheet. Why, exactly what it was. Do you know why they put the sheet on it to begin with? To keep the flies off of it. That's exactly right. It wasn't an issue of doctrine. It was a way to keep the flies from buzzing the unleavened bread and the fruit of the vine. I don't know about you, but I don't want to look down at the cup and all of a sudden I see a fly grinning at me. So with that being the case, it served its purpose, but it wasn't something we needed to bind on everybody, that we just always have to have the sheet over it. That's neither here nor there. But the scribes and Pharisees were binding traditions like they were having to be obeyed or you were wrong with God. And that's wrong. Anytime you bind an opinion on someone, and it's simply an opinion on someone that is not adhered or not explicitly let me put it this way, if it's not taught in the Scriptures in the New Testament, then we're wrong to bind it, period. Whatever our opinion may be on that, we're wrong to bind it, period, just like the scribes and Pharisees. Now, keep in mind, the first century Jew sees those scribes and Pharisees. They think they're the righteous ones of the day, so this is a monumental statement, and a courageous one by Jesus as well. Keep in mind, when he does this, guess what that automatically means? He's taking a stand, and you know what that means too, don't you? You're automatically going to have enemies when you take a stand. Who wanted him dead after he taught certain things? Who wanted to kill him after he taught certain things? The scribes and Pharisees many times. When you take a stand and you're brave enough to do such and call the error out for what it is, you will have enemies. Don't let that surprise you. We learned that back in the Beatitudes, remember? We are taught we are blessed when we are reviled, when we are persecuted, when they say all manner of evil against us falsely for the Lord's sake. We're blessed when we're persecuted for righteousness. That's going to happen. If you're a faithful child of God standing for that which is right and you're not willing to compromise it, you're not willing to back down from it, you'll have enemies. But keep in mind, our Lord did too. And we are no greater than the Master. All right, ye have heard that it was said by them, verse 21, of old time, thou shalt not kill. I've been using that this morning, haven't I? Now, you might say, well, wait a minute, you said thou shalt not murder is what you said, Corey, and this says thou shalt not kill. And I know in the King James Version, you go over to Exodus 20 where you find the Ten Commandments given. That's what it says. It says thou shalt not kill. The problem was the translators understood what they meant by kill back then. And a lot of folks today, unfortunately, think all killing in and of itself is wrong because of that verse, and it's not. If all killing is wrong, friends, then Jesus and the Father have taught error on some things, because have they not given us certain things we can kill to eat as food? And it is not wrong. Now, if that's your personal preference is against such, that's your personal preference. But to bind it would be wrong because God allows for that. If we partake of it with thanksgiving, there's nothing wrong with it. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But if it's your opinion against it and you don't want to do it, that's your choice. And that's what you want to do, that's fine. But in this case, when it says thou shalt not kill, it literally, if you go back to the original and look at what it means, it literally means thou shalt not murder. And there's a difference between murder and some killing. I'll give you an example of something that is not murder. Go to Romans 13. Someone read for us verses 1 through 4. Romans 13.
Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God. And they that resist are received to themselves damnation. For rulers are not a terror to good works, or to evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise on the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid, for he beareth not the sword in vain. For he is a minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon them that doeth evil.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate the reading.
What was that reading, Corey?
It's Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. And you can continue down through there, but we're going to stop at 4 for our sake this morning. You can continue down through there, and you'll see some more mentioned there that he talks about. Matter of fact, you go over there, and thou shalt not kill is mentioned there in verse 9, as a matter of fact. But nonetheless, this is sufficient for us. Who are the powers that be that he's talking about that are ordained of God in verse 1? The civil government. We need to understand that every soul is to be subject unto the higher powers. Who's he talking about here? He's talking about whether it's a king, whether it's a ruling body, whatever it may, the higher powers are, the governmental power. Christians and every soul should be subject unto the higher powers. Yes, ma'am.
But also, God told the people in the Old Testament to go in and completely utterly destroy everything.
You're right. You're right.
You know, children and women and everything else, and they didn't do that so that they transgressed their law of God.
You're right. You're getting a little off from where I am right now, but what you're saying is true. It's an applicable point to this. But that was times when God did command it. And we need to understand that too. That if God said, thou shalt not murder, and then he commands Israel to go out and kill certain people because of their unfaithfulness and their transgressions, did God contradict himself?
That's war.
That's exactly right. There's a difference between murder and some killing. And here is the example of it. The powers that be are the government powers, right? Okay? Every soul is to be subject unto them. Keep reading down there and take a look at verse 3. Rulers are not a terror to what? Good works. You do that which is good, you're going to have praise, it says, of the same, right? You do what the law says. Are they going to be coming knocking on your door all the time trying to take you to prison? No, not generally. I mean, that's just not the way it works. You do what the law says, you're generally going to be all right. You do that which is evil, what did he say? Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? You go out and you break the law. They have every right to come after you and to punish you for such. Even if it means, verse 4, since he is the minister or servant of God to thee for good, but if thou do that which is evil, you do that which is evil, be afraid, be afraid. You need to fear the powers. For he, the government, beareth not the sword in vain. What's a sword for? And it's not today a wall decoration. It was an instrument of war and killing. That was its purpose. The government has the right, according to verse 4, for he, the servant of God who is in this higher power position, is the minister or servant of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. The death penalty, my friends, is not contrary to God's law. The people who have protested outside of prisons and tried to say that Jesus wouldn't be for this and it's wrong to do this, they are misusing Scripture. It is not wrong, it is not murder for the powers that be to execute wrath upon them which do evil. The argument some people say, well, sometimes an innocent man goes to death. There are human beings, mistakes will be made. Do you throw away all law and all justice because of mistakes? You'll have anarchy. You'll have people doing that which they want no matter what, and it will be just absolute anarchy. With that being the case, I don't want anyone dying that's innocent. Nobody, I think, wants that. But you can't just discard the whole system and let the evildoers continue to get away with it, or you end up with the United States of America in 2021. Fair enough? Is that not what we're dealing with today? Look at what's happening out there because we've stopped doing what God wants done. With that being the case then, thou shalt not kill. Back to Matthew 5. Thou shalt not kill. That says there's literally, thou shalt not murder. Isabel's example, the Israelites of old being commanded to kill by God's command. That's not murder. The command here again is, in Matthew chapter 5, ye have heard that it was said, verse 21, by them of old time, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder, and whosoever shall kill shall be in danger of the judgment. Is that true? Yes, it is true, but they didn't go far enough with it. They thought it was okay to do something that wasn't okay. Look at verse 22. They understood killing was wrong. They understood murder was wrong. They got that point, and that's fine. That's good. They needed to. But they didn't get all of it. But I say unto you that whosoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. You mean, even if I don't go out there and I don't murder my brother, I'm still guilty of something if I'm angry with him without a cause? Yes. According to Jesus, the brother who does that is in danger of the judgment. Just as much as if you murdered the brother himself. Let's go to 1 John 4. By the way, it's interesting. Did anybody not get a bulletin today? If you didn't get one, I encourage you to get one. The sermon, or not the sermon, but the article is on brotherly love. Kind of ironic today that we're touching on that right now. Take a look over there at 1 John 4. Verse 20, someone start reading there down through verse 21. 1 John 4.
I got it.
All right.
If someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? And this commandment we have from him, that he who loves God must love his brother also.
There it is. Or as Hebrews 13:1 says, let brotherly love continue. God expects brotherly love amongst us. So therefore, if I'm angry or I hate my brother without a cause, I am just as guilty as if I'd killed him myself. Matter of fact, if you're still there in 1 John, it's actually, let me go back to it real quick. It's actually worded in such a way there that that's the way it describes it. Let me go to it. Let's see here. Where am I trying to find it? It's in there. Give me just a moment. Okay, 1 John 3:15. Actually, back up, if you will, to verse 14. We'll put it together. We know that we have passed from death unto life because what? We love the brethren. He that loveth not his brother abideth, or that means continues to abide in death. Whosoever hateth his brother is a murderer. What was the command that they got, but they didn't take it far enough? Thou shalt not murder. They understood that. The problem, though, if you're angry with your brother without a cause and you hate your brother, you're already guilty as a murderer in the sight of God. And ye know that no murderer hath eternal life abiding in him. You may never pull the trigger of a gun to shoot your fellow man. You may never take a knife or a sword and pierce his flesh and kill your fellow man. You may never do anything at all physically to cause the life of your fellow man to expire on this earth. But if you hate your brother without a cause, you're just as guilty. Friends, that's pretty strong. Most of us are probably going to say, I'm never going to murder anybody. I'm never going to murder anybody. I hope not. But if we're angry with our brother without a cause, we're just as guilty. That's what, and when you think about what Jesus is saying in the Sermon on the Mount, folks, these are eye-opening things that would have gotten their attention. I mean, these folks would have all of a sudden thought, wait, who is he? This is amazing. And whosoever shall say to his brother Reka, that's the idea of talking about him being like a fool, worthless. If you call your brother that way, shall be in danger of the council. But whosoever shall say thou fool shall be in danger of hellfire. The idea of Reka there, verse 22, it's the idea of actually vain fellow. My apologies, I said foolish. The foolish is actually the next one. Vain fellow, an empty fellow. You don't think much of him. If you don't think much of your fellow man or your brother and you're going to refer to him that way, you're in danger, he says, of the council. Well, keep in mind, back then they did have their councils as well. They had the Sanhedrin for one. And there were sometimes people would be brought before the councils for certain things. But he goes on and says, whosoever shall say, thou fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. Now, I want to clarify something about that before we go too far. Can we identify someone acting foolish? Yes or no? Did you ever watch your children do things you knew they shouldn't have been doing and they kept doing it anyway? You just wanted to wring your hands, not anyway. You know what I mean? Some things people do they are foolish in their efforts. It would be like a man going up to a nail that needs to be hammered into the wood and stand there all day long talking to that nail and say, I want you to get in that hole and I want you to get in it now. Hurry up, go! And never drive the nail in. That's foolish. You agree? It's useless, it's pointless, it's foolish. We need to be careful that we don't look at our fellow man that way. Calling him thou fool here is not just looking at saying that he's doing foolish things the way we often use it sometimes. It's looking at him as almost worthless. That he has no value, Major. Friends, every soul has value. It is created in the image of God. Every soul has value. It does not matter what that outward body, that outward tabernacle looks like. It does not matter where that outward tabernacle, that outward body lives. Every soul is created in the image of God and is valuable. And even if someone is not doing what he needs to do, we don't need to just get to the point where we write them off as being worthless and useless. Therefore, verse 23, therefore, when you find a therefore, what do? You ask what it's there for. Oh, come on now. Bobby's taught y'all that, I think. I thought so. So what are we talking about in verse 23? Therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar, and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother, and then come and offer thy gift. Now, it's in the context of these people have heard in the past, they got the thou shalt not murder. They understood that. They got that. They did not understand, they did not get it the way they should, that if you hate your brother, you're angry with him without a cause, or you think someone's useless or vain or empty or worthless, you're still in danger of judgment. He's saying all of that's true, so therefore, if thou bring thy gift to the altar, and there rememberest that thy brother hath aught against thee, leave there thy gift before the altar. You are one who does have an issue with your brother. You are one that is in a situation where you might have feelings towards your brother that are wrong, without cause, without need, and you know that it's that way. What did he say do? When you come to worship, leave what you're going to offer and go make it right before you worship. That's what he's saying. Look at it carefully. If thou bring thy gift to the altar, what is that? That's offering a gift in sacrifice, and you know you're offering for your worship to God. If you come doing that to worship, remember this is under the old law. Keep that in mind. So they would have done that back then under the old law. If you do that, you bring your offering, your gift to the altar, and you remember when you're there and you're thinking about it all of a sudden, my brother and I have a problem. Or as he put it here, that thy brother hath aught against thee. You know that your brother is upset with you for something you've done. You know that your brother is angry or irritated or whatever the case may be for what you've done. What should you do? Leave there thy gift before the altar. Put it down. Don't go on and try to worship God like that. That's the whole point. Don't do that. Don't try to worship God before you do this. You put your gift down at the altar. Go thy way. First, be reconciled to thy brother. If we want to worship God, we learn a very valuable lesson here. For our worship to be accepted of God, we need to be in the right relationship with God and our fellow man. It really goes back to it, doesn't it? Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Ma'am?
Especially with your brother.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, you have things against your brother. You should not even worship.
That's the idea.
Because you don't have nothing to offer, to God when you are angry or upset with your brother.
You're hitting it right on the head. Here's what Is your heart right when you have those feelings and you have that rift between you and your brother? Is your heart right? Then how do we think we can worship God with a heart that's not right? Think about that for a moment. First of all, go be reconciled to thy brother. Go talk to him. You know what's amazing to me? Is a lot of times if two brethren would sit down and just talk to each other. I'm not talking about yelling at each other. I'm not talking about being hateful to one. I'm talking about just sit down and talk to one another. Love one another enough to treat one another respectfully. Talk it over. A lot of problems could be resolved easily.
They have to be willing to listen to one
That's it. The brethren have to be willing, number one, to listen to one another. And number two, they have to have the courage to do that which is right no matter what. And it means that they're wrong. They have the humility to accept that and to say that and make it right. And if the other brother who's there has the brother come to him and do like that, he should open his arms up and welcome him back and be grateful that they're both now right with one another and with God. It's a reason to rejoice. Yes, sir.
Matthew 6, 14, 15.
Okay.
For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you forgive not men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses.
That's exactly right. Our forgiveness depends on our willingness to forgive. It is a fact in our lives that if we want that forgiveness, we have to be willing to forgive. Now, let's look at it again from where we're talking about the old law, and we have to understand that when we go through Matthew 5, that he's talking about the worship done under the old law, bringing the gift to the altar. But that's the whole point. If you've come to worship God, you remember that you have, or that thy brother hath aught against thee. By the way, let me clarify something too. There is a difference in offending a brother by saying something that is right and he doesn't like it, and there's a difference in causing your brother to sin. Those are two different things, are they not? You can be as nice as can possibly be under some circumstances, and it can be that maybe that brother's still going to get mad at you no matter what because he doesn't like the fact of what you said. But you have not bound the law against him. You haven't made that point against him that you're trying to get him to disobey God's law. But sometimes that happens, does it not? Well, whatever the case may be, whatever the issue is with the brother, if you know that there's aught against you with him, leave there thy gift before the altar and go thy way. First be reconciled to thy brother. Make it right. Reconcile. And then come and offer thy gift. Then we come back to worship. Now I have a question for you this morning, just as a thought. How many brethren around the world today are not going to be able to have their offering, if you will, of worship to God accepted because of that very fact? Just a thought. Agree with thine adversary quickly. Quickly. Why? Whilst thou art in the way with him, lest at any time the adversary deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer, and thou be cast into prison. If you can make it right to begin, let me just put it this way. If you nip it in the bud, all right, we're in Georgia, we're in the South, you know what that means, right? If you nip it in the bud, what are you doing? Yes, you stopped it, and you stopped it before it became larger and grew, right? Okay, if you want to look at it from that point of view. But if you think about nipping the bud doesn't flourish, the bud doesn't get bigger, the bud doesn't grow, right? You nip it in the bud, you take it when it's a small matter and get rid of it. Agree with thine adversary quickly. Why? Because if you don't, sometimes, just to be very blunt with you, it's going to grow. You ever had something grow in your heart and fester in it because you did not allow yourself to make it right quickly? And you started thinking about it, didn't you? Oh, no, I was looking down. No, I'm just kidding. No, y'all aren't looking down. I shouldn't have said that. We've been there, haven't we? Where we would have been better off if we would have done what we were told to do and made it right with our brother right then and there. We would have agreed with him quickly, and the idea of agreeing there means you come together in agreement with him. It's not that you disagree if he's wrong, but you come together and you work it out. Because what happens if you don't? Well, it can be a lot of bad can happen from it. In the old law times, at any time the adversary, your enemy, your adversary, deliver thee to the judge, and the judge deliver thee to the officer. The judge finds that you're guilty, and thou be cast into prison. And all you had to do with the whole thing was, if you'd have done it on the front end with your brother the way you could have, none of that would have happened to you. You see his point now? Sometimes it really is that simple, isn't it? And I'm grateful that there are ones who do see the need to do that. Verily I say unto thee, Thou shalt by no means come out thence till thou hast paid the uttermost farthing. If you go into have this happen to you, you're cast into prison because you didn't take care of it quickly, and all this built up on you, now you're in prison. You're not getting out until you pay the uttermost farthing. You wanted to carry it that far, well, you're going to carry it that far. You're going to pay every bit of it. And it probably was a matter that could have been easily handled if the two parties would have been civil with one another, kind to one another, looked at each other as brethren, looked at each other as equal in that regard, and worked together. Any questions there through verse 26?
Or we could see in part of that in the prodigal son, where the father ran out and embraced the son.
Yes, sir.
In my mind, the father, whatever his son did do, he had forgiven him. But the old son that came in the field, he had a different point of view about the whole story, and he didn't quite understand.
That's exactly right.
The father had spoken to him. And
By the way, when you go, since you brought the prodigal son up, that account, if you go over there to Luke chapter 15, if you'll go back to verses 1 and 2 there, you'll find the root of why he taught that to begin with. Look at verses 1 and 2 of Luke 15. You'll see why he taught the parable of the prodigal son, which really, and I know this sounds, it's not the parable of the prodigal son. It really isn't, not really. And I say that not to upset you, because I know that's what a lot of folks have called it for years, but it's really about the two sons. It's not just the prodigal that's the point. Look at verses 1 and 2. Then drew near unto him all the publicans and sinners for to hear him. And the Pharisees and scribes murmured, saying, This man receiveth sinners and eateth with them. What did the elder son say about his brother? Same thing. He looked down upon him. He didn't care about him. Jesus is trying to help them to do what's right. They looked down. That's the whole point of the parable. The elder brother were the scribes and Pharisees. That's the whole point. Because that was what they were doing. And it's sad that it's that way with some folks, but it is. If we be brethren, I can't help but go back to Abraham and Lot's herdsmen. When Abraham and Lot's herdsmen had a disagreement with one another, the older, wiser Abraham came and basically told Lot, you can pick out any area you want. Your herds can go over here, they can go over here. You pick out any area you want. That was unfortunately when he pitched his tent towards Sodom. He looked at the physical more than he did the spiritual. With that being the case, Abraham told him why that was the case. Why was he willing to let Lot make the choice to have that which was far better physically? We be brethren. That's what he said, literally said, we be brethren. He loved him enough, cared about him enough, that he was going to not make an issue of it to separate them in a bad way, to cause a rift between them that could not be made right. All right, anything else down through verse 26? I got to stop. I don't like having to stop. I enjoy going. But we'll pick up next time. Verse 27. Thank you for your time.